We started Culturally Speaking to indulge our curiosity about the way others live and a desire to inspire conversations about how we have far more in common than we realise.
Okay, so this week, the guest we have, I think is quite unique. Actually, I've never talked to anyone about voice, although voice is something that we use daily. Before we listen to Sylvie's story, I'm going to ask you the $1 million question, Neha. Do you like your voice?
Oh, it's funny because you can't hear your own voice. It's only, again, because we do this as we produce the podcast, that we kind of have this voice selfie to go back and listen to.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say I love my voice. Do I like my voice? Oh, that's an interesting... I do think it's part of my identity.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think if you have to practice self-love in all things, then yes, actually, you have. There's an acceptance of it.
So, okay, I think similar. I think I never used to like my voice, but I've accepted my voice. If that makes sense. So it sounds insane, but I used to really envy girls with a more feminine voice. I would say both you and I registered lower.
Absolutely. I was never ever going to be a soprano.
And you know, when I watch like horror films and these girls like scream, I honestly don't think that's what I would sound like in that situation. I think I'm much more likely to swear, to be honest, than scream. But
I can attest to that.
But at the same time, I used to feel like my voice reduced my femininity because it didn't sound as feminine. Yeah.
I think where I find more acceptance in my voice, and again, this is probably down to what you and I do in our day jobs, it does lend itself to gravitas, having a slightly deeper tone.
Yeah.
And due to the nature of what we do, I think it's fair to say it
helps.
Yes, it does.
We get taken more seriously, probably, than if we had squeaky voices.
We also mirror what we see around us, don't we? And I think voice is part of behaviour.
So interestingly, I sound different when I speak different languages.
Yes, I can imagine that.
And I don't think it's just because of the language or the dialect. I think, like you said, the voice coming, with the identity. Quite naturally, if you are multicultural like we are, I think we do carry slightly different versions of ourselves when we are in, whatever the majority culture is in the environment. And speaking of which, I think accents kind of ties in quite nicely with that, because I think my Cantonese has changed. So when I first came to school here, and then I would only really be speaking English. So English became my, first language.
Yeah.
I would consider myself equally fluent, to be honest, by now. But I used to speak Cantonese with a Western twang whenever I would go back, and people would find it hilarious, or they would assume that I'm not from there. And even now, I go into a shop, a lot of the times they try to speak to me in English.
So that's not actually that unusual. So when it's very rare that I ever speak English with you, but if I do, my mum always laughs because it's so anglicised. And that's because I've grown up here. Yeah. And I've never had, unlike you growing up in Hong Kong speaking Cantonese daily, I've never lived in India.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
So I've always learnt it with
anglicised ears. so to speak.
But it's funny because everyone around me that speaks it doesn't speak it anglicized. It's just when I practice or I have to say something, obviously my tongue is so much more used to, speaking English that I think the sounds naturally come out.
There is something in that, because apparently if you learn multiple languages before a certain age, you actually are able to hear more of the nuances. So because I grew up speaking multiple languages, I think I pick up new languages, or at least I can, make the pronunciations a lot easier.
I agree. I think that there is definitely studies about that, and about children that grow up in bilingual households often find it then easier at school to pick up a language. And I do think that there is some truth in that. And I think the intricacies, whether it's cases, tenses, genders, verb endings, you are slightly more tuned into it because, you're aware of it.
I was saying to someone that I don't remember how I learned English.
Because it was probably such a natural osmosis happening if you were speaking it, both that and Cantonese day to day at home, at nursery.
I mean, I remember at school, maybe in primary school, having to learn past participle. There was a learning part of it, but I just don't remember it. And obviously now when I speak, I don't think about it before I speak. Yeah, but speaking of, shall we have a listen to Sylvie's story?
Let's do it.
Hi, my name is Sylvie. I am an executive voice, accent, and communications coach. I am based in London, UK at the moment, but I am originally from Vancouver, Canada. And it's been really interesting being in the UK as a Canadian, as an expat, and teaching people how to develop their vocal confidence, understand what's going on with their voices and bodies in communication. And when we start to think about all of this, it is just a really empowering skill to have. And I suppose my background is more so in the performative arts to begin with, and I studied my Master's of Fine Art in Voice. And there's only really 5 different places in the world to study that. So it is a very, very niche topic. I have also really specialized into intercultural communication, as well as speaking to international audiences, which is a huge part of the DEI component of what I look at when we are communicating and how we use our voices with people. What does a voice coach do? Basically, what we do is that we help people with their voices in general. Now, voice coaching has come from more of a historical context of performative arts in teaching actors and performers how to use their voices to sing and how to use them for speaking when we are in a theater or in different spaces like that. And basically from that, we kind of start to spin off into somebody who is more into vocal development in the practical voice in the body and dealing with that. And then the other part is accent and dialect coaching. When you start to look at those things, once somebody has studied voice coaching, generally speaking, they would go into that type of realm. However, I have bridged the gap between teaching all these things within more of a corporate context in using the types of ideas in pedagogy, but creating a bridge to help other people understand what it is that we do. How do you adopt some of the exercises in a different way so that you can still build on your vocal confidence by working on your voice in a different way, in more of sometimes a more literal context, but without so much of the body work, especially when you're dealing with people who are working in offices. But at the end of the day, you are building and developing your voice so that you have more confidence to communicate more clearly with your voice, and also to develop a more positive relationship to your voice. And that's what I'd say what a voice coach really does. Voice is the technical thing that comes out of our mouth when we speak, but it is something that it can be explained in 2 different ways, I think. One is a sound that comes out, and the power of the sound that can come out of the body if we allow it to, if we know what to do with it. And you can also see that as the medium of sharing our thoughts and feelings and ideas and opinions through our voice. Our voices can be shaped in so many different ways, through sound, through words, through writing. And so if you're asking what voice is sharing your thoughts, ideas, opinions, and feelings in whatever way that you want to share it. That would be your voice. But if you choose to use it physically through your body, to share it through sound that comes out and is produced through your body, then that's the voice that I deal with a lot more. And when we feel connected to this voice, it has to be a good feeling in the body. If the feeling is not good, half the time we feel uncomfortable with saying what we want to say. There will be some type of a quality inside the voice that will tell us that I'm not 100% with it, but I might be almost fully there. But you can often tell what's going on in someone's voice by how they're feeling, and how that starts to affect the physical parts of the voice as well. How I fell into voice work really was when I was training as a performer. I didn't really know what voice work was until I was open to all of these different courses in university within the drama sphere, and I wasn't actually majoring in that place. However, I did do my first class there, and that was quite an eye-opening experience because I had never really been into kind of like a boot camp class. It was no theory in the teaching, even though you learn a little bit about the theory and how you are using your voice. But compared to like a psychology class, you don't sit there with a textbook. You are actually in the room doing things. And that made me want to think about, how do I discover more of this? And I had thought about, should I go into broadcast journalism, or should I explore acting? Acting was a really deep dive and really being thrown into the deep end without really knowing where to go. So I actually chose that one, and took a little bit of courage to do that. But also it was easier for me because the school was at home in Vancouver. So when I did that, that was where I started using the voice more, discovering different classes throughout a whole year of how my voice could transform in different classes through different texts. And it wasn't until a Shakespeare class there that I had a really, really passionate teacher. And I never actually paid so much attention to Shakespeare before, because every time that you have an English teacher, they teach it as part of the curriculum, but the passion's not really there. But this is the first time that I'd had a teacher that was actually super passionate about it, lived for it, and happened to be teaching it. And I just fell in love with it. And because he was a voice teacher, he actually told me what was going on with my voice. And I was just really fascinated by what he could tell from my voice. Voice is a very slow moving type of skill to build. If you train for 6 months, and let's say you have 3 hours a week, you can slowly see the difference when you look back in time, but you can't feel the difference as you are working through it. And that's really where I started falling in love with it, was when I could see the changes, I could feel the differences. So it wasn't really with the words, it was with the feeling and the passion of using words, and how it kind of just channeled through my body as a medium. So the quote that you read inside my LinkedIn article, which was, my habitual voice at that time in 2012 was habitually that of a little girl's voice trapped in a grown woman's body, that was actually something that was picked up by the same teacher that I was just speaking about. And it's something that can be really easily felt and seen if you are trained in the voice, to see where the voice is sitting in someone's body. And that was how I discovered that. Until he had said that, I didn't notice it, because it is your normal voice. It's just what you use every day for however many years. And so when I came to the realization, it was literally when he said it. And then it took me probably a few days, a few weeks for it to settle in. But then it starts to affect you when you really understand what that means and what that feels like. So that was really the realization of when I realized that, and in its full actuality of knowing that and living it and experiencing as a whole. I don't actually remember how I used my voice when I was younger, but I do know that I was very highly sensitive, and I still am today. I'm a highly sensitive, hypersensitive individual. But also at the same time, I knew that I expressed more than my family. So it's not how I used my voice, but I just knew I felt more emotions. I expressed a lot more through emotions. My voice could be used in completely different ways depending on how that emotion was expressed. And also, I never thought of myself as a person of color growing up. It's not something I look back on in thinking about that. I didn't actually realize I was a person of color until probably 2016, until someone actually said it out loud. And that's a pretty big statement to make there, knowing what you look like and looking in the mirror every single day for your entire life. And also, where I grew up was very multicultural, so I didn't feel like that I stood out, and it didn't make any difference to me that I was Asian in a group of white and Indian and different types of races everywhere around me. So that wasn't something that I actually ever thought about growing up. However, it's more so about assimilation into culture, whereby you start to adopt different hobbies and things that people do in that society. So I was a competitive cheerleader, I joined sororities, and then I thought I was blonde, you know, and that's the type of thing that starts to go into your head that you don't really see seeping in. And because of what you watch on TV, the movies that you watch, I was born and raised in Canada, so I had more of that Western upbringing than if I was raised in Asia. So if somebody asked me about Asia right now, I couldn't say anything about it, to be completely honest. And that's why when you asked the question about noticing that was, what was different as a POC as a child, when I discovered and the penny dropped that I was a person of color, which was 2016 at a voice conference in Chicago, actually. There was a Korean adoptee who's also a voice teacher. This conference is for just all voice trainers across the world. And she was giving a panel discussion on being a person of color. Until I was really listening into what she was saying, then I literally just sat there and was like, whoa. And then I had a question at the end, and there was just so much stuff going on inside of me at that time that I didn't really know. I just knew I wanted to ask the question. And I know it's a big one when I can feel my heart beating, because it doesn't happen like a lot, where it's just like you really need to say something. At the end, when she did pick me to say something, I opened my mouth but nothing would come out, and then I went into like a hysterical crying fit where I was like hyperventilating, and everybody was just like didn't know what to do, but they could see that everything she was saying was being reflected in my response. So there was a lot of stuff coming out, and it was big. The emotion was really big. It was uncontrollable, and I think that moment kind of encapsulated what it felt like to understand all these different moments in your life as a person of color, not knowing all these things are happening, coming out all in one go when you realize it. Oh, my voice has changed so much over time because once you start to work on your voice, there's so many things that change about it. One, you start to notice what your habitual patterns are and what you do in your voice. And then afterwards, you recognize that, okay, if I'm in performance, I do need to learn how to pick up different sounds and different sound shifts or accents and things like that. And my accent now is definitely way more general American than Canadian. But also the biggest habitual change for me was being from west coast of Canada, which sounds kind of like this all the time with all the girls, and your voice is really just like holding inside your mouth, and it goes up, and you just sound really girly, kind of described as an airhead or a valley girl. And yeah, that's just how it goes. And the voice doesn't ever drop down into the belly, into the gut, whereby if you are communicating your anger, anger can come from here, but anger cannot really come from here. You can't really hear the anger. And that was what the teacher I was talking about earlier was referring to. That's where that little girl's voice is versus the voice down here, which is more of a woman's voice, which is something that I think a lot of people are not really in touch with sometimes in North America, because from doing a lot of research from the different sounds and voices that people use, because my thesis was on how our cultures affect our voices when I did my master's. And it seems to me that from the research that I've done and from the experiences that I've had, a lot of North American women have a higher pitch, or they hold a higher pitch in their voice because they do want to be seen as more feminine. If it starts to drop into the natural pitch of the body, sometimes they already start to perceive it as manly because it's lower. But when I came to the UK, so many women use such a lower voice, which is their natural pitch, but they didn't have the same idea of thinking that they were a man. So that was a revelation for me to kind of notice that. And then when now I'm bridging the gap and understanding how the voice evolves over time, mine definitely did a massive shift. When I let go of anger out of the body, and I let that emotion channel through my voice, and I let all the holding in my body of muscle tension go, that's how my voice is the way that it is now that you hear it. that there is a lower bottom tone to it that did not exist. But also, that's where the gravitas lives. That's where the conviction lives in my voice, where when people hear it, they know what I mean because it lands now. And so I would say that's really how my voice has evolved over time. I think the changes that have happened over time in my voice have definitely made massive changes in the different things that I have done with my voice. If I had not discovered my voice then, before I did my master's, I would be in a completely different place, even if I was accepted into the program that I did, because you would have a completely different experience of it. What I believe is that if you have the body knowledge of what the voice can do in your body, you can teach it to other people. It's not something that you can pick out of a textbook and be really good at noting what's going on in someone else's body as you're coaching them. In terms of using the voice and understanding how it works, you have to know how it feels, because voice is such a physical thing. It's something that's happening physiologically in the body in terms of how the air is coming into the body, how easy is the body, what the voice feels like when it's coming out, when it feels squeezed or when it feels flowy. So without knowing all of that, of what I had to physically go through and personally go through myself, the emotional parts, the mental parts, the physical parts, without knowing all of those together, I don't think that I probably would be a voice coach today. Nor do I think, even if I was a voice coach, I probably wouldn't be a very good one if I really didn't know what was going on in my own body and my own voice, to be able to help other people to hear it, to feel it at the same time, and to help guide them to move through their stuff as well. Through all the difficult times that we're going through right now in terms of race and everything, I think our voice plays a big part in it, because we all have our own identities and we all think about how we relate to the things that are going on, whether we identify as that race or whether that we have friends that identify as that. At the end of the day, we all have voices to share. And I think with everything that's going on, it's really about making space and holding space for people to speak, to share their stories, to share their experiences if they want to. But sometimes about the voice is that it's more powerful to be silent and to decide to do that, not to be silenced, but to decide to hold back on what you want to say first, to make space for some other people who might need to. And that's exactly what happened when Black Lives Matter first kicked off last year into 2020. And I was leading a lot of webinars, and I led a lot of webinars during that time too, to talk about inclusion, to talk about diversity in voice, and to hear people. Some of it was about speaking up, but it's not really all about fighting or anything with the voice, but it's about finding the courage to use your voice in those moments where, if you never shared those stories before and you feel like that you want to share your story, that's where your voice can belong, if you find the right group and you find the right community to do it with. And also, in terms of race, there's so much emotional volatility that happens within the nature of the subject itself. So when we really start to think about how the emotions affect our bodies and how our voices come out in that aspect, sometimes we can't control the emotions that come out. So therefore, we need to find the right spaces to use our voice. We need to be very careful about it, because it's such a sensitive topic. It's a very vulnerable topic. Our race is our identity. Our voice is also our identity. And when we're using all of these all in one go with all the intersectionalities, it's really hard to know what is right and what is wrong, what is right and what is wrong. But also, at the same time, we still want to try to be authentic to ourselves in knowing who we are. We want to work towards being able to own our own identities, owning our voices, owning who we are. And like I was sharing with you earlier, I didn't really identify with being a person of color until I realized it. And that's the thing, is that when I realized it, a lot of the people around me didn't realize it either yet. So I didn't feel like it was my place to tell them what was going on. But having 2020 and 2021 happen, I think things are moving in that direction. And because I've had so much extra time to think about it from 2016 until 2020, it's given me a lot of insight into how I can lead these spaces for people, to allow people to find their voice in a place where sometimes it feels like the space is stifled, or that they feel like that it's not safe enough to say something, because it takes a lot of courage for anybody to speak up from where they're coming from and just to use their voice in the way that they really want to. A good question for the listeners out there listening to this episode, to have you think about your voice a little bit more. The only way that you can really do that is in the moment when you're speaking to someone, is really when you are checking into how they are responding and reacting to your voice. But also at that same time, even though you are noting how they are responding or reacting to your voice, you won't know exactly how it sounds as you are speaking. So the only thing that you can do is either record and play back to yourself, or you can also, if you place a magazine in front of your face and you speak into it and you have the sides of the magazine up close by your ear, you can hear the sound the fastest to hit into your ear in real time, so that you can hear what your voice actually sounds like in real time. It's a lot harder for us to work on our voices alone, but if you have somebody around you who could tell you what's going on with your voice when you are speaking, it might give you a little bit of insight into what's going on. But then again, I must say that you have to be very careful about who you ask, because people give a lot of subjective feedback all the time, and sometimes they don't phrase it in the right way, and it can leave a really bad mark on you. It can lower your confidence if you don't get the feedback that you want, and also it depends on how somebody is giving you that feedback. So the things that I would say most is, ensure that when you want to be working in your voice, when you are starting to observe things a lot more about how you speak and how you communicate, that you have a like-minded supportive group or community around you, so that when you ask these questions about developing yourself a little bit more, that you do trust the group around you and that you do trust their words, and you know that there's a lot of respect, because that is really needed when we are working on that. I would rate my life satisfaction probably to be like a 9.5, 10. I'm actually really happy with what I'm doing, with how I'm helping people. I can't see myself doing anything different, to be honest. There is a little bit of stress right now, just trying to manage timelines and, having two businesses. It does get quite busy. But in terms of the core and purpose of what I do, I am really, really, really happy that I have fallen into what I do. Looking back, really, it's an aligned path of having a BA in speech communications and fine and performing arts, and going into performance, and then finding out that I am going to do a master's in voice, and then owning businesses that teach people how to use their voice and find the courage within them to speak and communicate passionately, precisely, and with courage. I think it was probably quite meant to be, hopefully, but that's kind of how I see it right now, so I'm quite happy with it.
Well, that was a really interesting chat. Okay, standout moment. I feel like we need to cover it first. The Valley Girl.
Oh my god, that was as if she was a different person entirely.
I know, and how on the money it was.
Well, I mean, that was how she spoke.
I know, but when you think about all the trashy American TV, West Coast TV shows that we watch, they do sound exactly like that. And I remember distinctly when I was in school where it was almost popular to speak like that. We'd be you'd have that up at the end of the sentence, the very oh, I can't even do it without my mouth is foaming. I'm laughing just thinking about it, but it's just brilliant.
So when I grew up in Hong Kong and learning English, I swear this is something I made up in my head, but I always preferred the British accent. I thought it sounded more intellectual.
It completely does, but then when you grow up here, I think the American accent, because it's what's
cool.
Yes, I think pop culture.
It's Hollywood. But I don't know. What was that? Paris Hilton and what was that?
Oh, show? The Simple Life.
Yeah, it's really grating for me to hear the whole oh my god, no, I just cannot talk like that. I can't imagine. I don't know if I would be friends with myself if I sounded like that.
But this is what I'm saying. We used to watch the OC and things like that, and
Such a good show.
But you think about the way that Summer spoke. It was all very, like, I can't even do it, but the very staccato-y, like, you know, throwaway comment, like, it was great.
So, coming back to, you know, us now. So, living in London, both of us, you know, we're people of colour. And I think London itself is very different to the rest of the country because it's so multicultural. And there are a few things that I notice, right, around being in such a multicultural place. I think we do try to identify people by their voices.
I think voice is a massive identifier. It's part and parcel of who we are, what we're about, where we're from, where we grew up. So I don't think you can hear someone and not try to place them.
Have you ever been misidentified?
Absolutely. And you know this happens. It's always your voice, your name, and you don't match. Like, how can you look like that and sound like that? I don't understand why it's so mind-blowing to people. But yes, I mean, if I don't use my name.
I'm trying to now close my eyes and just listen to your voice.
But can you identify race in a voice?
Some races. But I actually think it's more because that race is not familiar to you that you identify it, if that makes sense.
Ooh. So, if it was a race that you knew, but they spoke in a way that didn't make it obvious.
I think I can always recognize, maybe it's mixed in with accent as well, but I can almost always recognize a Hong Kong person speaking English, even if I don't see them.
Yes, because your ear is trained.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think. So, because of work, I do speak with a lot of Indian colleagues. I find that the voices are like rich and like quite melodic. And I don't know if that's because of the language. So that even when they speak English, it sounds like, you know, buttery and smooth. You know? Like,
I love that. Buttery and smooth as well.
Yeah, whereas
I think some languages are very tonal, some are very flat, some are much harsher, some have a lilt.
I really, you know, I find accents actually very endearing. Like, I really appreciate when I hear someone with a slight accent. So, in particular, I love when people speak with a little bit of a Russian accent.
Okay, tell me, top accents.
Okay, fine. In no particular order. Irish.
Obviously. What Russian. Is it about the Irish accent?
It just sounds happy. I don't know. They're always happy.
You always sound like you want to hang out with them. Like they'd be good crack.
Yeah.
fun.
So, okay. Russian. Irish. I'd rate British accent. Like, I think I like hearing the British accent. What else? I find most African accents very commanding. Like, it's very good for explaining things. It always sounds like it's got so much confidence and authority.
Purpose. It's not wishy-washy.
Yeah. I remember...
Hang on, 1 second. When we say accents, these are people speaking English in these accents. Yeah, okay.
I think I'll come back to you about regional accents because you would know that better than I would. But I'm afraid I can't take the Australian accent seriously. Like, it sounds fun. Like, it sounds jolly and, you know, sunny and all of that and fun, but...
That's interesting. It does sound sunny. If I had to encapsulate it in a word, it'd be sunny.
Yeah, like it's a bright way of speaking. And there's this comedian called Russell Peters. I think, again, this ages me, because he's no longer, like, the most famous one. But he makes a really good point. Like, there are certain accents, like French accent, Spanish accent, generally Latin American people just exude, like, sexiness. Whereas Chinese accent and Indian accent, nobody ever finds sexy.
No.
Right? And I find that quite sad, like, on my own behalf. Like, although I don't speak with a strong Chinese accent, I feel like that's a bit unfair. Right?
But also the genders. Because a Russian lady or a Russian man, an Irish man or an Irish woman, I think, again, like, some of the combinations are inherently more attractive than others.
Yeah, fair. What about you? I'm going to ask you, like, regional accents now.
Okay, favourite regional accents?
Yeah.
Within the UK. I really, a little bit rogue, I really love the Welsh accent. It's very soft, and it's actually...
This is not me being discriminatory, but because I'm not familiar to these accents, sometimes I literally don't understand what they're saying. And one of my experiences with work was facilitating calls between Glaswegian colleagues and Indian colleagues. And obviously on this call, nobody understood either side.
Also, I've got a very similar story. So I spent a long time working in Edinburgh, as you know, which is, again, different to the Glaswegian accent. But we'd have a call, and it would be our Scottish client. We had an Irish person within our team. You had English. Well, I'm going to say very sort of, I feel like my accent can be quite ambiguous at times. So it's sort of, very neutral English. And then we had colleagues offshore in India.
Yeah.
And this entire call was just spent translating, and I don't mean this literally because everyone was speaking English, business English, but no one person could understand what the person before them had said. And it just became an exercise in repetition. And this would go on, right, for 45 minutes to an hour.
God. But I mean, affecting work aside, like I do think I prefer it when people keep a little bit of their accent, because...
But that's interesting you said a little bit, right? It's the acceptable face of it. So it's got a slight hint, but not too much.
I guess not too much, not from a very personal, like, oh, I don't like you kind of sense, but if I can understand it, it's fine.
But that's an interesting point, is it? Because if they have to change it to make it easier for people to understand them, they are watering down what makes the accent the accent.
Well, and sometimes, I guess, as with voice, right? Sylvie talked a lot about coaching people to change their voices for, either to sound more authoritative, perhaps, or whatever. I think some of this, unfortunately, does come from protectionism, right? So that you don't get discriminated against, especially if you are of a minority race in a different country.
So I read some research about accents and discrimination, and the two accents that are the most discriminated against, this is particularly close to my heart, so in the UK, are Indian accents and the Birmingham accent.
Really?
And imagine you're a cross-section of that.
I mean, there's a pretty big population that is a cross-section of that.
Exactly. So discrimination is well and alive and true. And to sort of the point of people covering or masking or trying to mask where they're from, I don't blame them, because it's obvious that they are missing out on opportunities or not being afforded the same opportunities if they use their authentic voices. So I don't blame them for doing that. But it's interesting that our biases are inherent, right? Northern accents sound less intellectual.
Yeah. Well, and also I think now I feel bad for, like, joking about, like, the Hollywood American accent, but I think that's just it, right? It's all prejudices that we've picked up. So, you think about the really like Valley Girl accent. I think in most cases, what we see on TV is exaggerated, right?
Absolutely, because they're playing a character.
Exactly.
The same way when you think about British reality TV or, made for entertainment, and we'll pick our favourite. I say that with irony. You think about Made in Chelsea. I mean, how many elongated vowels are necessary?
I know.
Really.
Can you please do a demo?
I don't think I can, because I don't think I have that voice. No, I don't think I can.
I'm going to try to find it. We can cut this out if I can't find it. Oh, there you go. I found it.
It's all the yarring.
So I've spoken to both of you separately. You're not happy with this idea?
Bit intense.
Take it seriously. Me and Zara spoke the other day, and obviously I feel like it's just going around in circles a bit. You might regret just not giving it a go.
It's, oh my god, it's the elongated vowels and like the vocal fry, the fake vocal fry, like at the end, like why? Nobody speaks like that. Like, I know people who live in Chelsea, they do not speak like that.
But this is where it's actually got nothing to do with regionality in that case. It's to do with
class.
Yes. And I would also say within class, it's about fitting in. So you might not be of that class, but because it's like fashion almost. It's like, I'm going to dress a certain way and therefore I'm going to make my voice fit a certain style.
So I know you've not, ever lived in India, but I know that there's a caste system in India. Is that evident in people's voices and accents?
So, okay, firstly, big country, many different languages.
Yeah.
So I'm going to talk about it from the perspective of people speaking English, because I think that's most relevant. People talking their own local regional languages, slightly different. So you can quite often, and it's not necessarily class or even caste, but you can quite often identify. I mean, I know when somebody is from Bombay. Sorry, we say Bombay, not Mumbai, but you can quite often tell from their English very quickly, because they'll have very specific Bombayisms in the way they speak. Similarly, people from Bangalore have actually a very theirs is more neutral on balance. Delhi has a specific way. Other parts of South India again have their own flavour of the way they learn English. So yes, I would say you can tell regionality even in the way people speak English. Similarly, I think you probably get that, when you think about the African continent, you can tell the way people speak English, where they're from. I don't know, across Asia, I mean, say, even within regions of China, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, like Japan, I think we can hear some differences, but I wouldn't necessarily be able to identify exactly and place somebody.
Yeah, I think within China, I could probably tell if it's northern or southern. It's quite a big difference. I mean, even in English, right? But so my last question for you before we wrap this up, do you have a preference in other people's voices? Let's talk about guys first.
Yes. So the stereotype of very high-pitched male voices being, they're at a frequency that sometimes I find.
I don't know that I know any guy with a very high-pitched voice.
It's the frequency, I think, that I sometimes find a little bit jarring. But I think in terms of accents and voices that I like to hear, I'm pretty agnostic and open. I enjoy people's slang words or local words. I think that does bring character to who they are, and it shows their personality, which I like.
Yeah, because there's a whole thing, like, I know you're not on TikTok, but I know there's a whole trend around guys with really deep voices.
But I think that's the stereotype, isn't it? That everyone thinks a guy has a voice that's like 3 octaves down here and is super deep. And actually it's not, right? Most people have a range.
Yeah.
I don't know if I know anyone who even speaks with that very deep sort of baritone voice.
Let me rejig the question. Now, let's talk about like people everybody would know, like celebrities, actors.
Okay.
Favorite voice, one guy, one girl.
Oh.
This is a quick fire question.
Henry Golding. Because
Okay.
Voice. You said voice.
Okay.
And female. I'm laughing because a very good friend of mine always sends me, there's somebody who impersonates her really well. Keira Knightley, just because it's really funny the way she has a very specific way of speaking, and her mouth does a very specific thing, and it's all very like,
it's a constant pout.
Yes, exactly.
I think Golding's voice. Okay, agree. I don't know if it's my favorite.
I really enjoy the very Britishness combined with his.
What's the actress's name who played Astrid?
Gemma Chan.
I really like her voice.
It's very soothing.
Yeah.
I like the kind of voice that could read you a bedtime story.
It's like magnetic. Yeah. So, anyway, people who are listening, remember that Sylvie actually gave us a few questions, right, to think about our own voices. So hopefully everybody learned something about their voices, and I do hope you like your own voice, because guess what? You can't change it.
Subscribe, rate and review on your favourite podcast platform, and follow us on Instagram at Culturally Speaking Podcast. You can also check out our website, culturallyspeaking.co.uk, for a transcript of this episode. Share your stories or your show ideas with us by sending us an email at theculturallyspeaking@gmail.com.